you would think that that person would care about humanity. That's the first way in which Prince Charles is duping the world. So you've got this green agenda that really the modern environmental movement, in large measure, began under the British monarchy between the 1800s and today. It goes back, for example, to the British Flora and Fauna Protection Society, and then to other things that came out of that, such as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the World Resources Institute, the World Wildlife Fund, its various branches, etc. All that was heavily connected to Prince Philip, and then now Prince Charles. And the modern environmental movement, the global one, this whole eco-fascist agenda with carbon trading and so forth, people will typically think of someone like Al Gore. But in reality, it's Prince Charles who's over the whole thing, not Al Gore. And Prince Charles is pushing that green agenda, which has a variety of additional agendas, and that gets down to the people you're talking about. So I'll be there in a moment. He's pushing that through the World Economic Forum and other bodies. And the effort involves global depopulation. So no, he doesn't care about the people on his estates. In fact, he doesn't care about humanity beyond wanting to wipe out, roughly 97% of the global population, like his father, Prince Philip, did, and like other globalists under him do. They've been plotting this for decades, and I'm documenting this in quite a bit of detail and a separate book on depopulation. That whole agenda has been under Prince Charles, and as part of that, the way they're implementing that right now as we speak today is to collapse the global energy system, oil and gas. They claim it's about reducing greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, this kind of thing. It's not. It's about eliminating much of our food supply. And now they're extending that, for example, in the Netherlands, to nitrogen gas from cows, not just methane, but now nitrogen gas. Without natural gas, part of what they're damaging right now, that global system, without natural gas, we can't produce a lot of the synthetic fertilizer that much of the food production globally depends upon. So they get rid of natural gas, they greatly reduce the ability to produce food globally, to feed, the billions of people on this planet. But then when they eliminate nitrogen by killing off or eliminating a lot of, for example, the cattle production that we might see in a place like the Netherlands, which is the second largest exporter of food in the world after the United States. That's very surprising to a lot of people to hear, given the size of the Netherlands. But right now, today, under the World Economic Forum, they are working currently to reduce the production, including of beef and so forth, in the Netherlands by 30 to 70% between now and 2030. And initially, they're offering to buy the land from these farmers and these cattle ranchers and so forth there in the Netherlands. And I don't know if they call themselves cattle ranchers, but they're initially offering to buy it. And then they're going to confiscate it. And they're pulling similar things on the books right now, just in the law. In Australia, they're not really forcing it yet or implementing it to any degree yet. They're working on the same thing in Canada. They're trying the same thing here in the US, working on it behind the scenes with the Biden administration. And when you talk about lawless actions on the part of Prince Charles and whether he'll actually be held to account, we have maybe the most corrupt politician in the White House in history in the United States, with Jay Biden, and then before him, Obama. And Obama is really the one running things behind the scenes right now, like a third administration of Obama. They're not being held to account because our system in the US is now thoroughly corrupt. Between the FBI, the DOJ, the CIA, etc., it's thoroughly corrupt. We may see another stolen set of elections here in 2024, and maybe this year. We'll see. It's totally possible. But the point is, nobody's holding these people to account, even though their lawlessness is literally out in the open and it's extreme. And, we talk about Benedict Arnold in the United States. If this country survives so long, it'll be Abomination or Joe Biden or Barack Obama instead of Benedict Arnold. I mean, that's how bad it is. And so the U.S. is being sold out to China and other interests by a Manchurian candidate, Joe Biden, and a corrupt regime that's beholden to China rather than Russia. Everybody's crying out over what Vladimir Putin is doing in Russia and blaming him for what's happening with global energy, and blaming him for what's happening with the lack of the export of food from Ukraine, which supplied much of the grain to the Middle East and some other areas, particularly Europe and the Middle East, but especially the Middle East. 30% roughly the global grain output coming from Ukraine, 70% of sunflower oil, I think it is, and other things, and a lot of potash and fertilizer coming out of Russia and Ukraine. All of that's stopped up right now because of the war. And so Russia's getting blamed for these things, but really it's Europe and the West that's forcing this situation, because we're not going to solve with sanctions or this kind of thing what Russia's doing. That is just not going to happen. In fact, what we're going to do instead is push Russia toward global war, nuclear war. The thing they're claiming they're trying to avoid is the thing that they're actually triggering by the actions that are being taken, in addition to collapsing the global energy and food systems that we have. So we're moving, in other words, Tony, to a situation where in months, 2 years from now, people will be starving. Diesel vehicles, for example, in the United States, trucks won't be running, which is what transports much of our food supply here in this country. So even if the food's available, it won't be transportable.
Well, you've also mentioned the World Economic Forum. Prince Charles does seem to, over the years, have been frustrated by his lack of being the monarch in Britain, having to wait so long. And as a result of that, he seems to have taken on a very what he sees as a very important international role through things like the Rio Earth Summit, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, all his good friends. So it does seem as if his ambitions are more global potentially than they are to do with taking over Britain.
So you have a lot of people today who've heard of the Great Reset because of this book that Klaus Schwab wrote and that was publicized. Klaus Schwab started started the World Economic Forum. Prince Philip was heavily involved with it behind the scenes before his death for a long time, for decades. Prince Charles has been heavily involved with it for decades. What a lot of people don't realize who've looked at this Great Reset, which is kind of a new euphemism for the New World Order, in other words, actually implementing it finally on a global scale. What a lot of people don't realize is that the title came from Prince Charles. It didn't come from Klaus Schwab. And Klaus Schwab is not the person who announced the Great Reset to the world. It was Prince Charles who did that. Months before the book was published, months before anybody heard of Klaus Schwab's book. So Prince Charles in January 2020, I believe that's the correct month. Somebody can fact check me on that, but I believe it was January 2020, Prince Charles came out and personally announced the Great Reset to the world from the World Economic Forum itself. Months later, Klaus Schwab published his book by the same title. The whole thing has been orchestrated under Prince Charles, and most of the world's nations are signed on to this thing, this Great Reset agenda, through the World Economic Forum, and most of them have been taken over, the Western ones, by the World Economic Forum, those who weren't simply signed on. That includes Canada, it includes Australia, it includes the United States, it includes the UK. So, Justin Trudeau, totally under the thumb of the World Economic Forum, besides being a lover of communism and an admirer of Xi Jinping, and China's system.